So I'm going to show you how to build a simple game in App Inventor, a mole mash game. And this is a game where this little mole kind of jumps around the screen. You try to press it to get a point. Okay, and we're going to start off by dragging a canvas in. Canvases are the component where animation happens, where drawing happens. So anytime you want to do kind of that kind of stuff, you'll use a canvas. And I'm going to make my canvas, I'm going to make the width feel parent, meaning it's going to go across the whole screen, and the height is going to be 300 pixels. Okay, there's these other components in the animation folder, and one is a ball, one is an image sprite. I'm going to grab an image sprite. These guys only live within canvases. They know how to move around, and they know if they're colliding with things, that sort of thing. So they're great for animation. Okay, I'm going to rename that guy my mole sprite instead of image sprite 1, and that's okay. And in fact, I'm going to give it a picture, and I've already loaded in mole.png, so I'm going to choose that guy. And so now I've got this mole that can be on the screen, and my goal is for him to jump around. Okay, so one thing to know about animation is you kind of need a timer, an alarm clock, which will kind of trigger the activity. So I'm going to drag in a clock component. Notice it goes in the non-visible components. And what it's got is a timer interval. It's almost like I'm going to fire off an alarm every 1,000 milliseconds. So it's in milliseconds. And 1,000 milliseconds, a millisecond is 1/1000. So 1,000 milliseconds is a second. So every second, I'm going to get an event that the clock triggers. Okay? So now let's make this guy jump around. I'm going to go over to the blocks editor, and the first block I want to grab is the clock, and the clock.timer event. And really what you need to know is this thing gets triggered every 1,000 milliseconds because I've got 1,000 here. If I put 500 here, okay, then this timer would get triggered every 500 milliseconds or every 1/2 second. We can just leave it there for now. Now when the clock goes off, what we want is we want our mole to jump around randomly in the canvas. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to change its coordinates. And indeed, we want to change its x coordinate and its y coordinate. There's a couple ways to do it. One is with the function called move to, and we'll start with that one. So I want to move my sprite, and I want to move the x somewhere and the y somewhere, and I want to move it to a random place. Okay, so randomness is fun. It's for games. It's really necessary, of course, but there's a nice function called random integer. Okay, and really we want to move the mole, at least on the x coordinate, side to side. We want to move it between 1 and the width of the screen, pretty much. Okay, so I'm going to just type in a 1, and kind of we want the width of the canvas here. Okay, so I'm going to grab canvas, and I'm going to grab its width property. Okay, and I kind of want to set the x property to that. Okay, I'm going to grab that, copy it, and for the y property of the mole, so the y is the vertical position of the mole. I still want to go from 1, except instead of canvas.width, I want canvas.height. Okay, so that's what I want to do, and this is going to work okay. And there's the mole randomly jumping around. The only problem with this, and I don't know if I think we saw it right there, is probably with both the width and the height, we want to make sure he's completely on the screen. Okay, and the XY coordinate of the mole is its left top corner. So the way we're doing it right now, he might show up off the screen or half off the screen, and we probably don't want that. So if we really want to be precise, instead of making it between 1 and the width, we're going to make it between 1 and the width minus the width of the mole. In other words, we want the farthest the x could be is about right there. That way the mole would show up here. So the biggest number x should be is width minus, canvas dot width minus the width of the mole. So I'm going to grab a minus. I'm just typing minus and canvas dot width, and then what I want is mole sprite dot width. Okay, and he is right here. Okay, and that's going to go there. And then kind of the same thing for the height. I'm going to grab mole sprite dot height and use it, and also the minus sign. And so I want to give it canvas dot height minus mole sprite dot height. And I don't know if the change is going to be that visible, but anyway, we're going to make sure that mole stays on, completely visible on the screen, and this is how we do it. So now we've got part of our game such that this mole randomly jumps around on our canvas. Hi, so in my previous lesson we started building the game Mole Mash, and we made it so every 1/2 second, every time the timer goes off, we move the mole to a random place on the canvas. And that's what we got going right now. Okay. In this lesson, what I'll show you is let's let the user try to touch the mole, and when he does, let's give him a point and let's show him the score. Okay, so let's keep score of how many times the player can touch that mole. So first thing I'm going to do, I want to make this canvas so we can see it. So let's just choose, I don't know, is green a good color? Yeah, it's pretty bright, but let's try gray. Okay, I don't know if that's any better, but we'll start with that. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to add a score here down below the canvas, and that score is going to be a label because it's going to be some text, and that text will start off as 0. Okay, and I'm going to rename that label as the score label. Okay, and then I'm going to add another label, and this one's going to be just kind of text, and it's going to kind of just label the score. So let me add a horizontal arrangement so we can make these guys go next to each other. But I'll throw that one's just purely for make things look good, and this 0 is the number that's going to change. So label 1 is truly just a kind of a label, and score label is some text, and which has a number in it that we're going to change every time the user touches that mole. Alright, so I think we're ready to do the behavior for this app. And I'm going to come over to the behavior editor. We already know what happens on a timer, but what we got to define now is when someone touches the sprite, what should happen. And sprites have a nice function called touched. Okay, and when they touch that sprite, so when they touch that mole, and if you're using an emulator, you got to click it. I don't know if I can even touch it. What we want to happen is you touch him and his score gets 1 bigger. Okay, well, let's see. Let's first just do something a little bit simpler. Let's see if we can just change the score label when we change it. So I'm going to grab score label.text, and I'm going to grab a number. Actually, I'll have to grab a text block, and I'm just going to put a 1 in there. So when I touch the mole, the text score label should change to 1. So it's 0 to start. If I could touch that guy, it should go to 1. Now to test this, I'm going to go back over to our clock. I'm going to slow that guy down. So I'm going to make him change. I'm pretty slow. I'm going to make him change every 2 seconds. So I know I can touch him now. And notice I clicked in and the score changed to 1. The problem is, of course, if I click them again, the score stays at 1, because really my reaction to touching the sprite is to change it to 1. So I don't really want to change it to 1. I want to change it to 1 more than what's there. Okay, and this is, we want to increment the score. And the way you do that is you grab a plus operation, and really what you want to change score label's text property to is you want to change it to what it was plus 1. Okay, so I want to add 1 to whatever it is and stick it back into the score label. So you kind of, what the app does is actually, does this almost right to left. So it first says, what's in the score label.text? Well, it's 1 or 0. Let's say it's 1, then it should take that 1, add 1 to it, which is 2, and that's what gets put in or set in to the text. So let's see if this works. So it's set to 1 now, and I'm clicking it, and every time I click it, it goes up. Okay, this is exactly the kind of the behavior I want. I've now incremented the score every time the mole is touched. So we built this little game here where this mole, every little timer interval, kind of jumps around the screen randomly. And then a player, if they touch the mole, gets a point, or 1 is added to this score label right here, which starts out as 0. So if I click on that mole, oops, there you go, I get a point, and I got 3 points there. So now let's make it so, a little more interesting, let's make it so if I miss the mole, I lose a point, and if I click on him, I get a point. So in other words, if I click here somewhere, my score should go from 3 to 2. Okay, to do that, we're going to have to use an if statement. And an if is a conditional, so it says, instead of saying we're going to do these blocks, it's like asking a question, or the app asks a question, and depending on the answer, does something different. So in other words, the app, when we click on the canvas, is going to ask a question and say, hey, when the canvas was clicked, were we touching the mole or not? Okay, so what I'm going to do is go to my blocks and grab the canvas and the canvas touch. So notice before we were only doing something on this mole sprite touched event. Okay, now instead what we're going to do is we're going to see if the whole canvas gets touched, because that's a more general thing that we need to know. Okay, if the canvas is touched, let's take away a point. So what I'm going to do is just kind of steal this code up here, and if the canvas is touched, and these pluses are nice, you can grab that little arrow and turn it into a minus, but if the canvas is touched, I'm going to take away a point. Okay, let's see what happens. This is not exactly what we want, but this is a start. So if I click on the canvas over here, yeah, good, it took away a point. But let's see what happens when I click on the mole. Notice the score stays the same. And the problem is, both these events are getting triggered. The mole sprite.touched event is getting triggered, which is adding a point. But even though I'm clicking on the mole, I'm also clicking on the kind of the underlying canvas, so it's taking away a point. So I'm no longer scoring a point when I touch the mole. Okay? So really what I want to do is, when the canvas is touched, if I touch the mole, get a point. If not, take away a point. So what I'm going to do is grab a if statement, actually an if else. Okay, you'll notice it's if else and a test, then do something, otherwise do something else. Okay, in this case, our test is pretty easy, because when the canvas is touched, there's a little parameter here that tells you whether any image sprite in the canvas has been touched as well. So it'll tell you whether you've touched just the canvas directly,
or there could be 3 or 4 sprites on here. If I've touched any of them, that parameter touch sprite is going to be true. So my test is just going to be, and I'm going to go to my blocks and my definitions. My test is just if touch sprite. That's either true or false. When this event gets triggered, App Inventor puts true or false in there for me, and I just got to check that thing. And so what I'm going to do is put that in there, and what I'm going to do is I'll just copy this for now. Though I'll show you. We'll get rid of that in a second. But when the canvas is touched, if the sprite, the mole, was touched, give me a point. If it was not touched, take away a point. Okay, then I'm going to go back up here, and I'm just going to get rid of this code here. In fact, we could get rid of this whole event handler, but I definitely do not want to add an additional point, because this part of the if statement, so if I've touched a sprite, is basically doing the same as when I had this mole sprite.touched up here. Anyway, let's check it out. Let's see if this is going to work for us. So right now score is 1, oh, back to 0, -1, not doing so well. But if I click on the mole, as you'll see, it is now giving me points. And if I click outside it, it takes it away.
Alright, so we've got this mole match game, and if we click on the guy, we get a point. If we click off it, we lose a point. And, that's how it works. But now let's make it so we actually have some energy, and we can lose that energy when they miss. So instead of taking away a point from the score, we'll lose energy. And I'm going to start by just coming over here and adding a label. And I'll put the label right here. And the label can be background color of blue, because blue for energy. And I'll give it no text, and I'll give it a width of 100 pixels, and this 100 is important, as you'll see in a second. And a height, we'll give it of 20 pixels. So I'm going to put a 20 for the height, and now we have this label. So what we want is that thing to get smaller as the player loses energy. Okay, so I'm going to come over to the blocks editor, and what we showed last time was we got rid of the mole sprite.touch, and we kind of replaced it with when the canvas is touched. If the sprite's been touched within the canvas, then we get a point. So we can get rid of these blocks, but we are no longer going to lose points if we miss. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this score label to score label -1, and I'm going to add a variable, and that variable is going to be my energy. Okay, and remember, variables are kind of hidden memory cells. I'm going to call this guy energy. By hidden, I mean the end user can't see what's in there. So we're going to have to show the end user energy in some way. In fact, in this case, we're going to show it by changing, this thing to make it less wide, right, as the energy goes down. But we're going to start the energy, sorry, I put a 0 in there. We're going to start as 100. So our energy is 100, and let's just say every time you miss the mole, we'll take away 10 from the energy. Now once I create this variable, its initial value is 100, but in my definitions I can change it with this set block, or I can look at it with this block. So I'm going to grab this set energy, and I'm going to grab the read, or the way to look at it, and then I'm going to go to my math and grab a minus. And in fact, what I'm going to want to do is set the energy to itself -10. I'll just type a 10, it'll make me a 10 block. So every time I miss, I'm going to make energy smaller. But like I said, that's a hidden variable, so it'll show up on here, but we want it to also make the width of this label smaller. So every time I update energy, I'm going to go to my label, and I forgot to rename my label, so I'm going to go over here and
I'm going to call this guy my energy label. So notice it's not my actual data, but it's the thing that's going to show the energy. Okay. Now back in the blocks editor, I go to energy label, and in this, whoops, sorry, I don't need to change the text. I want to change the width, right? So I'm going to change the width of the energy label every time. And I started my energy out as 100, and I started my label out with a width of 100. Okay, I could have made those different and kind of done some proportional math, but in this case they're the same. So every time I change the energy variable, I am going to change my width to equal exactly what energy is. I'm going to go get a reference to energy. So the first time through, energy should change to 90, and the width of my label should then change to 90. Okay, so let's see if we've got this working. So every time I miss, I should see that blue get smaller. And voila, pretty good. Alright, so we've got this nice game where if we click on this mole, whoops, missed him. But if I click on him, I score a point. If I miss him, his energy level goes down. Okay, now we want to make it so the game ends. Okay, so there's a game over when that score gets down to 0. Okay, so in other words, if he misses 10 times, because we start this guy at 100, we take it away 10 every miss. When he misses that 10th time, we're going to end the game. Okay, and just to make it kind of fun, I'm going to come over and add from the other stuff a text-to-speech component. And this guy's nice because when you add text-to-speech component, you can have the phone say things. It'll be kind of a funky voice, but you can have the app say things. Okay, so I've got my text-to-speech component, and the game is going to end when energy gets down to 0, right? So I'm going to need another if statement, and that if is actually going to live within this else do. So in other words, if I miss the sprite, I come to this else, and only in that case might the game end, and that's where I'll check it. There's no reason to check if the game ends up here because you didn't lose any energy. Okay? And my test, of course, is going to be, is my energy down to 0? Okay? So I'm going to grab an energy reference. I'll grab from the math, I'll grab a equals, and I'll just make a little 0 block. And I might want to be careful if I wasn't dealing with even numbers or whatnot. Maybe I'd get lower than 0. So I could actually just say, if it's less than or equal to 0, okay? Just in case I skipped 0 and got below it. In this case, it really won't matter. But if my energy is less than or equal to 0, game over, right? And the simplest thing for game over is, let's just go ahead and speak it. Let's tell the user, look, it's all over, buddy. And you can just put a regular text block in, and whatever you stick in there, the app will speak it. Okay, so if we try this real quick, if I miss a bunch of times, there goes my energy, and
it's all over, buddy.
And it tells me I lost. Okay, that's cool, but as you'll notice, I can still score points, which obviously I don't want that to do. And the mole's still moving around. We should stop the mole. We could also do some things like make him roll over dead, that kind of thing. But for now, you know what? Let's make him stop, and we'll also make it so I can't score any more points. Okay, the first thing to make him stop is I'm going to go to the clock, and I'm going to grab the clock.timer enabled, and I want to set that. Okay, I don't want this timer to go off anymore. Okay, and timer enabled means, yeah, every whatever time interval, do this stuff forever and ever. Okay, unless I set my timer enabled to false. So once I have a game over, I'm going to do that. Okay, so let's just start this guy up so we can see it working. But my timer should stop that guy from moving when we run out of energy. And the other thing I want to do is make it so I can't score any more points. But that's going to be a little bit different. One problem is, for whatever reason, the canvas component does not have a enabled button. So we can't make it so touches are ignored. We're going to have to ignore them explicitly. It's not hard, but we'll have to do it with an if statement. Okay, so my game's going to start here, and there he goes. And let me just lose real quick, and we should see that mole stop jumping around once I run out of energy.
It's all over, buddy.
And yep, looks like the mole is stationary, so cool. So we've done two of the things we want to do. We speak it up, and then we disable the timer. But you'll notice if I do touch in here,
it's all over, buddy.
It's still going to tell me it's over or do whatever, okay? And in fact, what we really want is nothing else to happen, okay? So, in fact, if clicking on here lost me a point, I wouldn't want that to happen either. So one thing I could do is in here only react to the event if, in fact, energy is greater than 0, okay? So I could put an if statement around the whole thing. In other words, if, and I'm just going to copy this guy and bring him over, but if energy is greater than 0, okay, so if I've still got energy, if I've still got energy, then let's do all the stuff we want to do when they have energy. So one time I'm going to touch it, I'll still have energy, and I'll go do whatever's here. At one point I'll have 10 in my energy, I'll get it down to 0, I'll speak this, I'll disable the clock. The next time I touch it, energy will be 0 or less, and I won't do anything again. All right, so let's try this out. And as it's restarting, let's just go over the logic once more. Every time they touch the canvas, the first thing we do is say, look, do we have any more energy? If we don't, let's just ignore everything, okay? If we do, let's see if they touch the sprite, give them a point if they do. But if they missed it, we'll take away some energy, tell them the game's over, disable the clock. The next time they touch it, game's still over, and energy will not be greater than 0. Okay, so I think it started up. Let's see if I can score points. Yes. Now let's try to lose. And
it's all over, buddy.
Good. So it got me down to energy 0. Stop the sprite. And if I click on here, it will no longer say my voice. Or if I was losing points for missing him, I would no longer lose any points.